Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. I will be joined shortly by Aaron Bastani. Coming up tonight, I have an interview with Dr Nick Maynard on his time in Gaza. This is in relation to a court case which is being brought against the UK government for exporting F-35 jets to Israel. Also, some evidence suggests that Starmer's recent speech may have backfired, and a U-turn on winter fuel payments may be incoming. And Gary Lineker has called on people to keep talking about Palestine. He said that silence is complicity. It's wound up lots of people, but he is, of course, correct. Stay tuned for all of that. As ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. We're looking at Gaza, and we're going to get that taken care of. A lot of people are starving. Now, those were the words of Donald Trump. He was speaking to journalists in Abu Dhabi today. Wasn't speaking to cameras, which is why I'm just reading you the quote. Marco Rubio has also said he's troubled by what's going on.
We think that the elimination of Hamas is what achieves peace. We're troubled by the humanitarian situation there.
Of course, those words by both Trump and his Secretary of State massively understate, I should say, the carnage their ally is doing to the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. And in material and diplomatic terms, they continue to give Israel their full-throated support. And those who actually care about human rights and dignity are becoming ever more exasperated in their warnings. So Human Rights Watch have today warned that Israel's plan for Gaza is inching closer to the extermination of Palestinians in Gaza. Their director said this: hearing Israeli officials flaunt plans to squeeze Gaza's 2 million people into an even tinier area while making the rest of the land uninhabitable should be treated like a 5-alarm fire in London, Brussels, Paris, and Washington. Israel's blockade has transcended military tactics to become a tool of extermination. This is from Human Rights Watch. Israel has blocked any food or aid from entering Gaza for 10 weeks, and their intensified bombing of the Strip is causing over 100 deaths a day. Yesterday, 143 people were reported to have been killed by Israeli bombing. Channel 4 News last night had an incredibly powerful report on what that looks like.
This was, even by recent standards, a particularly deadly day in Gaza. Northern Jabalia struck from the air with bunker-buster munitions. But it is by no means exceptional. You just need to look at what remains of the skyline beyond for a sense of how long this has been happening, and at the small hoard of foodstuffs in the foreground for a sense of the scarcity and desperation being lived right now. Among what was hit here, a clinic come pharmacy.
We were taken by surprise. It was a massive Israeli strike. Dozens were killed, including women and children. As you can see, there was no one left alive.
At the nearby Indonesian hospital, another day of new raw grief. For these children, it's the day they lost their father. Ours just one of the cameras recording it. To what end, they might ask. My dear dad, the boy cries out. His sister says, I swear to God, you were carrying the whole family. You held us together. In southern Khan Yunis, another family torn apart. 2 baby brothers, one 16 months old, one 6 weeks. My children, my sweethearts, says Safa Najar. Her daughters, adding to the ranks of Gaza's traumatized children.
Really, really powerful. I mean, horrific report, especially, I suppose, that juxtaposition where they show you that pan of quite how many buildings have been completely destroyed. I mean, from what I saw, all of them, and then you see that actually, that had a human cost. They're not just buildings that have been destroyed. There would have been likely people in those buildings. Israelis are now carrying out their genocide, of course, even more openly and explicitly than before, which means among Western governments, condemnations are now slightly more frequent and defences of Israel a little more rare, but action is still basically non-existent. And disgustingly, we, the UK, are continuing to export parts of the F-35 jets Israel is using to flatten Gaza. the justification for that is exceptionally despicable. So the government lawyers this week argued in court that F-35 exports were in fact more important than stopping genocide. The case against exporting F-35 parts is being brought by Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq. Britain supplies 15% of the value of the F-35 jet, including ejector seats, rear fuselage, active interceptor systems, targeting lasers, and weapon release cables, mainly through BAE Systems. The Guardian reports this. In papers to the court, the UK has acknowledged that its supply of F-35 components for potential use in Israel is in breach of its own arms export control laws. The laws state that arms export licenses must not be granted if there is a clear risk those items might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law by Israel. The UK government's lawyers say the maintenance of the global F-35 supply chain is of paramount importance, and parts are not being supplied directly to Israel. So they're not being supplied directly to Israel, but they're being supplied to the global F-35 system, which means a bunch of them are ending up in Israel. So the moral difference is, non-existent. The Guardian go on to report this. In a submission revealed at a preliminary hearing, the Defence Secretary John Healey said suspension would affect the whole F-35 programme and have a profound impact on international peace and security. So we have to give these parts to bomb children for the sake of peace. He added that it would undermine US confidence in the UK and NATO at a critical juncture in our collective history and set back relations and could cause adversaries to take advantage of any perceived weakness. So I suppose, the summary of that is we're continuing to export these F-35 parts being used in a genocide because we don't want to upset Donald Trump. That's basically what that translates as. Another argument made by the UK government is that they have not seen sufficient evidence of women and children in Gaza being targeted by Israeli bombing. That claim has led to protests from British doctors who have worked in Gaza since October 2023. Now, some of them gathered outside the High Court this morning to give their testimony. And earlier today, I spoke to Professor Nick Maynard, a consultant and surgeon who has worked extensively in Gaza since 2010 and who has travelled out to Gaza regularly during the current war. I began by asking him about his experiences in Gaza.
I've been going to Gaza for 15 years, but I led the first emergency medical team that went into Gaza from the UK in December 2023 and spent 2 weeks at Al-Aqsa Hospital there operating on trauma bomb victims non-stop, really. Then I went out again in April and May of last year, and I'm about to go out again next month.
Could you tell me what that was like? Obviously, this court case is to some degree the government sort of saying, we're not 100% sure if they're committing human rights abuses. There's some evidence, but it's not that strong. What have doctors like yourself tried to alert the UK government to?
We've not tried to alert. We have alerted them, and I can talk about that because I've shown them the evidence. We have all seen the most appalling atrocities. I've seen things that I never would have expected to have seen in any healthcare setting. 70% of the patients I treated were women and children. In the operating theatre, the majority of the people I operate on were women. In the emergency room, the majority of the people I treated were children, often just a few years of age. We saw, and I can speak really on behalf of all the healthcare workers who've been out there that I've spoken to, we saw appalling injuries, multiple traumatic amputations, predominantly in children, missing 1, 2, sometimes 3 limbs, appalling burns, again, predominantly to children, many of them fatal burns, terrible bomb blast injuries, shrapnel damage to the chest and to the abdomen, bullet injuries. We all saw pre-teen children with bullet wounds to the heads and to the torsos. We saw all injuries you can imagine. So the predominant theme really was the majority of the injuries we saw were women and children.
And I suppose there's two issues. Well, there's more than two issues, but sort of two distinctions one can make. So this war, I think everyone agrees, has disproportionately impacted women and children. Now, the Israelis say that's because Hamas hired under hospitals, yada, yada. I don't want to give too much credit to that argument. But the other sort of argument that I've heard, actually, especially from doctors, is it's not just that women and children are collateral damage in this, but that snipers have been specifically targeting children. What you've just told me sounds like it accords with that. Presumably, that's also something you've told to the government, and they're ignoring, essentially.
I do not believe for a second that what we have seen is collateral damage. I think there's overwhelming evidence, and we've seen so many of these cases that are compatible with deliberate targeting of women and children. And yes, I've been to meet government ministers multiple times, meeting cross-party MPs. But specifically in January of last year, I went down to the Foreign Office and met the then Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, and the International Development Secretary, Andrew Mitchell. And I told them what I had seen. And not only did I tell them, I took them enlarged colour laminated photos of dead children I had treated, of terribly burnt children, of children missing limbs, of children with severe head injuries with brain exposed. I showed them an X-ray of a small child with a bullet in his head. So yes, there is no question that they have been shown this evidence. I haven't had the opportunity, despite trying, to see the current Foreign Secretary. But there's no question we have given that evidence to the previous government. And of course, there were many Foreign Office officials and civil servants in that room at the time. So they've been shown this evidence. There's no question about that.
You said earlier you were part of the first sort of medical mission from the UK to Gaza after this war started, or genocidal war, however we want to describe it, when that started. You've been there once since then. You said you're about to go again. What's your sense of how the situation has changed since you were first there?
In virtually every respect, it's got worse. I think the most intense bombing was when we were there for our first trip in December 2020. That was utterly relentless and really didn't stop for the whole 2 weeks we were there. So perhaps the intensity of the bombing has reduced, but the deaths we're seeing have got worse. And that's is because not only are people dying of the aerial bombardment and the shootings as well, but they're dying in their thousands of due to other causes, excess deaths. That's a term we became very familiar with during the COVID pandemic, due to diseases not directly attributable to the trauma. So all the chronic diseases that can't be treated. There's 350,000 patients at any time in Gaza with chronic diseases such as heart disease or strokes or kidney disease or diabetes. And of course, the malnutrition, the appalling effect of the malnutrition induced by the starvation that has been imposed upon them is leading to thousands of patients dying from malnutrition and all the consequences of that. And that was most stark to me on my last trip, when we saw the effects of malnutrition on patients that we were operating on with war injuries and their inability to recover from that surgery because of their malnourished status and the impossibility of giving them any nutritional support. So and I hear from people now that is ever worse, that the starvation, we've heard there's no aid going in. So I think we tend to focus on those that are being killed directly by the war, by the military assault, by the bombs, the gunshots. And of course that is terrible, but actually many more patients are dying of excess deaths, and specifically from malnutrition.
And I know you're a doctor, not a lawyer. I know you're in surgery this morning, in fact. But could I ask you to speak about this court case? To your mind, what's the significance of this case being brought against the government about exporting parts for the F-35 bombers being used by Israel in Gaza?
It seems utterly unconscionable that our government can continue with exporting or facilitating exporting of arms to Israel when they have incontrovertible evidence, and it is undeniable they've seen that evidence, incontrovertible evidence of war crimes, children, women being killed. I was in Gaza in May 2023, my last visit before October the 7th, and I was caught up in the middle of the last sustained aerial bombardment on Gaza before October the 7th. And I witnessed at first hand the bombardment, but I saw how sophisticated their targeting, the Israeli Air Force targeting could be. We witnessed with our own eyes how the Israeli Air Force took out single rooms, single floors of buildings where they were targeting particular people. And the collateral damage from that was limited. So we've seen how sophisticated their targeting can be. And then roll forward, I've seen, again with my own eyes, the indiscriminate targeting of whole civilian populations in towns and settlements, in camps. So there is no question in my mind that what we've seen are war crimes. And it seems, and there's no doubt the government knows that, and it seems utterly unconscionable they can continue to provide arms and have not yet called a full arms embargo against Israel.
Let me just end actually by asking you a question about one particular aspect of this war that I imagine you feel particularly strongly about, which is the repeated bombing of hospitals. What's your, I suppose, understanding of how unusual is it for this many hospitals to be bombed in a war zone? Is this something you could have ever imagined happening?
No, I mean, this is the first war I've worked in. I'm not a surgeon who goes to many wars. I'm a Gaza expert, call it what you wish. So I'm out there because of Gaza. But it seems I would never have imagined that the hospitals could have been targeted in the way they have. And again, there is no question that there is very, very hard evidence the hospitals are being attacked, that many innocent civilians have been killed in the hospitals. Many healthcare workers, over 1,400 healthcare workers have been killed. Over 400 healthcare workers have been abducted and illegally detained in Israeli prisons from these hospitals. When I was working in Al-Aqsa Hospital in January last year, the intensive care unit sustained an Israeli missile attack whilst I was operating in the operating theatre next door. We heard that the European Gaza Hospital, Nasser Hospital, were bombed in the last 2 or 3 days, with many doctors working there and patients. The European Gaza Hospital has now been disabled. They cannot operate at all there. We saw appalling footage of Shifa Hospital being attacked, and friends of mine were killed in that hospital. So it seems it's unfathomable how our government can continue to arm the Israeli military, knowing beyond any doubt that these war crimes, these direct attacks on hospitals, these direct attacks and killings of healthcare workers are continuing.
Mea culpa. I pissed off a few people on Monday and Wednesday's shows by appearing to downplay the nastiness of Keir Starmer's immigration speech. And we got a few thoughtful emails about it. And to be honest, on this one, I think you guys were right and I was wrong. So I still think what Starmer was saying about an island of strangers was a million miles from what Enoch Powell was saying when he used the word, just the word, in his River of Blood speech. But that did distract me from the other things Keir Starmer said, namely that a period of high immigration was a squalid chapter that caused incalculable harm. A squalid chapter, very unpleasant word. Well, squalid is very unpleasant, isn't it? An incalculable harm. Clearly, to say that about a period of high immigration is I mean, it's wrong. It's factually wrong. Right? Yeah, that's caused incalculable harm. Very different to any other policy. Very much what Ash was talking about on Wednesday. This is to say that Ash was correct on Wednesday and I was wrong. I suppose where I was coming from, I tend to think that on both sides of the political divide, people are quite quick to sort of scream offence and to sort of say, you've used the wrong word because it can be interpreted this way or that way. And I think that has a tendency to sort of heighten polarisation and make everyone a bit more stressed and miserable than they need to be. But in this case, I think people's anger about this speech was warranted on second thoughts. I think also I tend to think that there is, or particularly on the left, the moment anyone suggests there might be some challenges as well as benefits to immigration, to say that's beyond the pale, which I think is a mistake. But again, the language Keir Starmer used in this speech, on reflection, went way beyond that. Aaron, we're going to talk about some of the political impact of this speech in a moment. First of all, we haven't done a show together since he made it. What are your thoughts after having let this sink in?
Well, I watched the show on Wednesday, Michael, with you and Ash. I thought it was a really outstanding conversation. I agreed with much of what Ash said. I wasn't quite where you were, but I was sympathetic to the arguments you were making. But I think Ash is correct in so much as, in many ways, the worst parts of his speech wasn't necessarily that word, strangers, which attracted the most anger. Squalid, incalculable, and talking about these things purely in relation to migration. As Ash said, he has never used the word squalid in regard to feces and detritus being pumped into our waterways and oceans as a result of privatized water companies. He's never talked about the incalculable damage of austerity or privatization. If he has, in a hallmark speech, I'm really happy to be corrected. I've never seen it. So he was using a tone of language, which is actually quite unlike Keir Starmer. He's quite a boring guy. He doesn't like emotional language. And he was reaching for an emotional tone of language you very rarely see with him on no other policy topic. And to use it here alongside, I think, the intentional deployment of that word strangers, to echo Enoch Powell. I don't think the speech was like Powell's speech in 1968, but I think the point was to echo that word and to start a fight with the left. As you said, Michael, I think that certainly was the intention. But I do think there was also something really distinct and nasty about what he was doing. And it's particularly aggravating, Michael, because it's coming from a politician who claims to champion diversity, who claims to be anti-racist. You know, if Nigel Farage or Rupert Lowe or Richard Tice say that, you say, well, look, that's always been their political beliefs. That's basically their brand of politics. They are very open in rejecting immigration policy. That's what they've done. But then you have something like Keir Starmer as recently as 2020 saying that immigration is not the reason for decline in public services. It's not the reason for the housing crisis. It's not the reason for crumbling public services. He's now saying the complete opposite in the most emotional possible register. And I think, frankly, Michael, it's disgusting. He's a disgusting man. He doesn't believe in anything. As I've said, I mean, I genuinely, I'm now at the point where I have more respect for Richard Tice or Nigel Farage or Zia Yusuf, or there's no consistent Conservatives, to be quite frank. Maybe you might say Jacob Rees-Mogg, he doesn't seem to change. I have more respect for those people than for Keir Starmer. I really wonder what Keir Starmer would say no to at this point. You know, what political position or what rhetoric would he say no to if he thought it could save his political career? And it really is extraordinary, Michael. Just zone out for a second, take a step back. A week after they had this huge defeat, the man is, I don't like the word hate because I don't think anybody should hate anybody. He's powerfully disliked by tons of the electorate. A week later, he points the finger at migrants. And that, to me, whether you're pro-migration or you're anti-migration, I think most people would agree that is the hallmark of a very cowardly man. A really cowardly, despicable act, in my view. And I think one of the advantages of a politician like Keir Starmer is meant to be you have these conversations in a way which is moderately technocratic. You listen to people and you take the heat out. If somebody wants to say, look, we should have a migration policy where it's net migration of 250,000 a year, here's why, or 100,000, whatever, but they do it in a way where you're taking the heat out, I much prefer that to somebody like Keir Starmer saying, I'm pro-diversity, let's go on a pride march, I love immigration, I'm having a vegetarian curry, but it was a despicable, incalculable episode. You know, he's adding to the fire. He's putting kerosene on it. He's not trying to cool things down, which is meant to be a part of his political brand. The point is he can't really do that with any kind of charisma or political pull. So they're having to do this instead. I know that we're going to now talk about some of the consequences of that. You know, it's not been as advantageous politically as some of his advisors might have thought. Who would have guessed Morgan McSweeney, the man who advised Liz Kendall in 2015, the man involved in a campaign which got 4.5% of Labour supporters to back it, Labour members rather, to back it. Who would have thought this person actually isn't necessarily as smart as the whole media seem to make out? I'd like to say this as well. Dominic Cummings is a damn sight smarter than Morgan McSweeney. And as we know, he got eaten for breakfast. I wonder where Mr. McSweeney will be in 12 months' time.
Well, I mean, I was going to say Keir Starmer's no Boris Johnson, but I mean, neither of them were. I mean, one of them was a much better communicator than the other. I imagine they're both equally. I don't know. I was listening to an interview. Who was it with? Sam Friedman, where he was sort of saying Dominic Cummings and Morgan McSweeney. Both of them seem to think that sort of they're the power behind the throne, but ultimately it will always be the political leader who gets the final say. And so the moment you fall out, it's going to be you, not them, who's out. I mean, with Keir Starmer, I feel like Keir Starmer without Morgan McSweeney is going to be even more rudderless than Boris Johnson without Dominic Cummings was, but we'll see. But yeah, it doesn't seem to be going very well. So clearly they made this speech with some of these sort of phrases that could be interpreted in very sinister ways. And some of them, as I say, very bad language, squalid, incalculable harm. They used those because they wanted a row. Now, you would imagine that would mean that they'd sort of said, well, this is an issue that we think we can get on the front foot on this week. But it does seem to be another example of Labour being all over the place. So the Albania trip just seemed completely weird and pointless. So there was a pointless plan, I think, to set up return hubs for failed asylum seekers. You can deport failed asylum seekers anyway. It didn't make any sense. And then what was worse, well, from a PR perspective, is that the Albanians said, we don't want this anyway. So why make the trip? The Prime Minister making a trip to Albania and then having nothing to announce. Very, very strange. The party do also just seem to have a pretty flawed analysis of the electorate. So Politics Home had a report yesterday on a top Starmer aide claiming reform voters are Labour people who are just pissed off. The quotes were from Claire Reynolds, who is Labour's political director, and she was giving a briefing following the Runcorn, so the by-election and the local election losses. So this is from that article from Politics Home. At the meeting, MPs were shown private polling that indicated Farage's Reform UK was able to mobilise habitual non-voters in Runcorn, while Labour voters stayed at home. Reynolds said, Reform voters are not necessarily right-wing. They are people and they are pissed off. Now, there's a very strange passage because the first paragraph contradicts the second paragraph. So you're saying Reform voters are not necessarily right-wing, they just are people who are pissed off. But then before that, the presentation she's supposed to have shown, this advisor, said that Farage won because Reform managed to turn out non-voters and Labour voters stayed at home. So again, I'm sympathetic to the idea that Labour have to try and peel off some Reform voters. Unless they peel off a sliver of Reform voters or a sliver of Tory voters, then it's going to be very difficult to win in those constituencies, which is the majority of constituencies, frankly, where people are sceptical about migration. So you're going to have to peel off some of those. But if you see Reform voters as your, as your natural voters, beyond sort of peeling off a sliver who you might be able to reassure, that's what they're doing, and it's not going very well. This, though, I thought was really embarrassing for Labour. So it's from that same article. Reynolds also admitted to MPs that Labour's vision for Britain is a work in progress, according to Labour backbenchers at the meeting, who was being the people who were being spoken to. So this is a government who's been in office for a year. Keir Starmer was obviously leader of the opposition for 5 years. The whole sort of point of attacking the left and kicking them out of the party was to say that we're a party of government. And then a year in government, they still haven't worked out what they're for, what they want to do. So they can't, it's not that they can't communicate to the public what their vision is. They can't communicate to their own MPs what their vision is because they haven't got one. This is also really disastrous for Keir Starmer personally. So this is the difference between his favourability among the general public and then among supporters of each party, the supporters of who people voted for in 2024. And what you'll see at the top is people being polled in mid-April, and then the next thing you're seeing is people being polled in the middle of this week in mid-May. And this is really disastrous for Starmer because among all Britons, he's gone from minus 34, so favourable, only 28%, 62% saying unfavourable. So that was in April, minus 34, and now he's gone to minus 46. The fall has been particularly catastrophic among Labour voters. So just a month ago, he had a favourability, sort of net favourability rating of plus 29. So 29, so the 62% of people had a favourable opinion of him, and 33% had an unfavourable opinion among Labour voters. So Labour voters were still happy with him, even if no one else was. But now even Labour voters don't like the guy. So he's now on -5. So he's down 34 points in a month among Labour voters. And then this is the really catastrophic bit if he was trying to peel off Reform voters, because in April, 93% of Reform voters had a negative view of him. Only 4% had a positive view. Now, you might think, surely it can't get much worse than that. Well, fast forward a month, and now 96% of Reform voters have a negative view of Starmer, and only 2% have a positive view. So he's on -94 among Reform voters. I suppose the things that have happened in that month were the local election losses that have made sort of Starmer look ineffective. If you're a Labour voter, you want the leader of your party to be ineffective. But also, you've had sort of discussion of the PIP cuts, and then you've had the Island of Strangers speech. That's disastrous. And Starmer appears to be willing to take desperate measures. So according to the I newspaper, Number 10 are in accelerated talks about reversing last year's cuts to the winter fuel payment. So the report in the I paper says this. Talks in Number 10 about abandoning the policy have accelerated this week after focus groups indicated voters would not necessarily bear a grudge against the government if it performed a partial or full U-turn. They go on to say this. The I paper understands the government is considering whether to increase the £11,500 income threshold over which pensioners are no longer eligible for the allowance to bring more people into the benefits net. Also being discussed, but extremely unlikely to be agreed, is to reverse the policy altogether. And so presumably, if they sort of have it so that more people get the winter fuel payment by heightening the threshold for getting pensioners credit, this whole sort of ordeal, as well as costing them loads and loads of support, could presumably cost the Treasury money. Because if this is going to mean that more people get pension credit, then presumably that's going to cost quite a lot of money for the rather small savings they made on the winter fuel payments. Aaron, lots to comment on here. I mean, it's not looking good, is it?
The idea that this could end up being revenue negative is just, it defies belief, Michael. I mean, I can't think of anything, I can't think of a political own goal like this in my lifetime. I know we look, we have to talk on this show every day, every week about stuff, and it's often a big deal, but people like to be hyperbolic or they're stuck in the moment. I'm being deadly serious. This is without doubt the most disastrous, unforced political own goal in my lifetime. It was only meant to raise £1.4 billion a year. It had a massive political overhead for them. It was told to me by absolutely every single last person I met in Runcorn, whether or not they were planning to vote for the Labour Party. You had that great line over the following weekend given to the Financial Times by Labour MPs saying it was the decisive original sin of this government. It was a whose side are you on moment. And we told them, we're not on your side. They did all that for £1.4 billion, obviously never worth it. Now, if they go back on it, the idea that it's going to be revenue negative for the Treasury when the country already has a massive deficit, Rachel Reeves already has to look absolutely everywhere. I mean, Michael, this might end up being, a couple of $100 million or whatever revenue negative. People are going to lose benefits. People are seeing various tax thresholds being frozen. So you're running more money, you get pushed up into a higher band. To cover the arse of Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer monumentally screwing this up. I mean, it's just incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And I think we've just had one set of local elections, obviously. I think we're going to have another in May 2026, which is going to see elections to the Senedd, to Holyrood in Scotland, local elections across England in many authorities where Labour are presently often the only party or the only major party. Every single local authority across Greater London, across the West Midlands, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds. I suspect, Michael, I mean, if he lasts that long, by the way, and I think Starmer will last that long, but you look at some of the data you just showed there, I mean, I don't know how he does, frankly, but let's say he does last that long. I don't really see how he survives for very long after those local elections, because then you've got 400 plus MPs. They're going to lose at least half of them. People's self-preservation instincts start to kick in. The question is, who's going to replace him? There's no obvious candidate with a large parliamentary majority of their own. I mean, Wes Streeting's probably going to lose his seat, right? So, if anything, that's the only thing that will keep Starmer in place, I think, till next May. But after next May, I suspect he's toast. I mean, we had a great Plaid Cymru MP on this week. They're leading in some polls for the Senedd. If Labour lose Wales, it's just extraordinary. I mean, that's a bigger heartland for them than anywhere in England. Anywhere in England. People talk about the Red Wall, etc. Wales has been a one-party political state since, for 100 years. For 100 years, Labour has been the biggest party in Wales. To lose that would just be utterly extraordinary. I suspect the English sort of media class won't really understand the significance and the scale of that, but it would be something to behold. And they would really be reduced to a rump party in Greater London and the wealthier parts of the Northwest. That's what Labour would become. Except, of course, those places are also going to be exposed to challenges from Greens and from independents as well. So really, really, really extraordinary data. I think you said 96%, Michael, of Reform voters, don't approve of the guy. 96%, and your entire political messaging is to get those people on board. They fucking hate you. I wonder at what point do him and the rest of you around him start to think, actually, this probably isn't a particularly smart strategy. I understand the fact that because of our political geography in this country, you do need to win those swing voters in those seats, which are increasingly reform curious. I get it. But when you're hemorrhaging twice as many voters to the Lib Dems and the Greens as you are to reform, and I think, if anything, that's probably accelerated in the last month. That's certainly what that polling indicates. You have major problems. You have major problems. Is anyone in his sort of inner circle smart enough to discern this? Because if you say that and you say, look, we were wrong, like you did on the show this evening, Michael, I was wrong. First of all, you have to be have to have a bit of gumption about you to do that. Secondly, it would be really at odds with their entire worldview. Their entire worldview was to go right, attack the left, win the centre, you get to power. That's their worldview. And actually what they need to do now, which is consolidate their centre-left vote, and they've clearly got to offer something to reform voters, clearly got to offer something. I think the problem for them is, even if you want to do that, Starmer's not the messenger. Surprise, surprise, a human rights lawyer who represents a constituency in North London, who sounds more adenoidal than a bunged-up child who hasn't seen Vicks Vapor Rub for a fortnight. Surprise, surprise, he won't appeal to those people. They're not his people. He's not their man.
Let's focus on reform for a moment. So we don't want to get carried away with sort of Schadenfreude about Keir Starmer failing without sort of being clear about what the most likely alternative is at the moment. Reform, of course, I partly because they've risen so quickly, partly because political journalism isn't necessarily all it's cracked up to be, haven't been subject to much scrutiny. But it is worth reiterating, they are pretty wacky. This is what their deputy leader, Richard Tice, said this week to the BBC about climate change.
You can't stop climate change. And this, I think, is the big lie. Climate change has gone on for millions of years and always will.
You're not just having an argument about how we do net zero. You're actually having an argument about whether we should bother at all. Not just because China's bigger and India's bigger. You're basically saying to the country, it's all guff. David Attenborough's talking nonsense. 1,000 scientists are talking nonsense. 99% of climate change scientists, they're all talking nonsense. Again, I know better.
And that's a nonsense figure. That 99% figure is a nonsense figure. The reality is, I can give you a list of 1,000 scientists who disagree. Science is never settled. It always evolves. But here's the point.
Most of those scientists, I think, I know who you're referring to, and they're not climate change scientists, are they?
There's plenty who are. There are professors with Nobel Prize winning professors of physics and engineering who take this view. Look, the point is, you can't stop climate change. And this, I think, is the big lie. Climate change has gone on for millions of years and always will. What you can do, and I think the smart thing to do, is to adapt to it. My issue is that net zero is the wrong thing, the wrong time, at the wrong price.
I mean, it's very like the wacky end of the Republican Party, but Reform clearly think they're onto something with sort of attacking net zero. Apparently that electorally doesn't make much sense because it's a sort of 1-to-1 ratio of that. There's no one who isn't already reform curious and really angry about migration that also really cares about net zero is what I read. I'm not an expert on this, obviously. But the idea of saying climate change doesn't really exist. It's not really made by humans. The scientists disagree. Like, we settled that about 15 years ago. What are they thinking? Like, why can't they just be a single issue party who are kind of normal but really want to stop migration? Why does it always have to come in this? I'm not saying I would like that party, but I just mean if you were an electoral strategist, surely the most sensible thing for Reform to do would just be really against migration and then be kind of normal in other respects. But they can't help but be really cranky on a bunch of issues.
Well, on this, Michael, look, there's been an energy crisis in this country. The cost of industrial energy is some of the highest in the world, and they need an explanation for that, of course, and an explanation which blames the other side. So politically, it's quite useful for them, although, of course, I agree with you. Quickly on the science, the last time we had this much atmospheric CO2 on our planet, sea levels were 40 to 60 meters higher. 40 to 60 meters higher. The last time the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, you've got CO2, nitrogen, argon, oxygen, etc. It's composite. But the last time there was that much CO2, sea levels were 60 meters higher. I think if the sea levels were 5 meters higher, maybe 10 meters higher, 10 meters, I'd probably be underwater, I think, here, Michael. So I think probably in where you are in South London, I think you probably would be too. 10 meters is quite a lot. With the Thames, even with the Thames flood barrier. So 40 to 60 meters higher puts, I think, most of the world's major cities underwater by a long way. We should take that seriously. In the whole history of primates, Michael, in the history of primates, forget human beings, in the history of primates, we haven't had this much CO2 on our atmosphere. So then the question comes down to the timeline, right? We know what happens when you have changing composition of your atmosphere like this, what it does to warming. This is all proven with regards to causal mechanisms. You do X, you get Y outcome. We know that. You're going to get planetary warming. The question is how quickly. That's the big question. And look, this planet, Michael, is 5 billion years old. When you're talking about planetary environmental systems, the margin of error being 1,000 years is actually quite a small thing. Of course, in politics, if I say this is going to happen for 1,000 years, it's never going to happen. If I'm saying it's happening next year, that's a huge deal. And of course, if you're out by 10 years, then you're redundant. You don't know what you're talking about. But the causal mechanisms and what is almost inevitable is understood, not up for debate. There has not been this much CO2 in the atmosphere in the history of primates. Okay? If we go above 2 degrees C, very plausibly, you then go to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. You create a bunch of feedbacks with regards to methane hydrate coming out of the oceans, with regards to permafrost melting, methane coming out of principally Siberia. If you get rid of the Amazon, has a massive impact on the global hydrogen cycle, in terms of it sequestering CO2, giving out oxygen, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bunch of things that feed into one another. Past 2 degrees, we're in big trouble. We're in big trouble. I mean, we're already in big trouble at 1.5, but after 2, you're in really big trouble. And what Richard Tice is effectively saying is that it doesn't matter we've got more CO2 in our atmosphere than in the history of primates. It doesn't matter the last time we were here, water levels were 60 meters higher. It doesn't matter that 2 degrees could become 3, 4, 5, 6. The planet will literally be uninhabitable for our species. None of that matters because I won't be alive. I won't be here. And we owe the future something, Michael. We owe our kids something. We owe our grandchildren something. But we also know people beyond that something too. Everybody watching or listening to this will have used antibiotics, I think, more or less, right? The leading cause of death for human beings 100, 120 years ago was infection, bacterial infection. The leading cause of death, whether that was from an injury or in childbirth or, pneumonia, the leading cause of death. That is completely eviscerated as a fundamental reality of the human experience by antibiotics. Save hundreds of millions, maybe billions of lives, right? Billions of lives. I'm very grateful for the people involved in that research, Michael, all the way from Alexander Fleming all the way through to the US Army in the Second World War, creating the the supply chains to build that stuff out to make antibiotics really cheap, penicillin really cheap. I'm really grateful for those people because they saved my life. I would have died, I'm sure. By now, I'm 41. I would have died without antibiotics, I'm pretty sure. So I'm very grateful for those people and what they did. We stand on the consequences of their actions. The same applies, of course, for people in the future. And I find it remarkable. We have inherited such an incredible planet. We live within a context of culture and tradition, language, technology, which we've inherited from other people. And yet, because of the political cultural moment we live in, when we think about our descendants, we think, fuck them. Fuck them. Oh, well, I won't be here. And it's a toxic and actually quite new way to think. It's a very new way to think, in fact. And I'll finish with this. For people like Richard Tyson, Reform, for them, climate change means, oh, I'll get a Pinot Noir from the New Forest. Oh, Kentish white wine, sparkling white from Kent will be fantastic. Will be better than the stuff you get from the Champagne region. But that isn't where it stops, okay? That's what it maybe feels like now or in 10 years' time. That isn't where it stops. It potentially stops in the Gulf Stream disappearing and Britain having a climate like North Norway, okay? That's where it potentially stops. It potentially stops, like I say, with 6 degrees warming 100 years, 200 years from now, and literally anything with lungs can't breathe. It ends in the lifetime of my grandchildren with every major Western city being underwater. All plausible. These are plausible things. They might not happen, but that again goes back to my point about antibiotics. Maybe somebody will figure it out with regards to bacteria. No, somebody did figure it out. They took action. They did it. They built something. And all of us owe them a huge debt of gratitude. We owe the future something too.
The knives are out for Gary Lineker again, this time because he shared a cartoon about Zionism, which at one point included an emoji of a cartoon rat. He deleted the post and unreservedly apologized. Of course, it's not enough for Israel's most avid defenders. And in the Telegraph, Jake Wallace-Simons has said it is too little, too late. Also in the Telegraph, Lineker has given a pretty powerful interview about why he won't stop speaking up for Gaza. So he told an interviewer at the paper that he believes if you are silent on Gaza, you are complicit. This is a quote from him. It's beyond depraved. What they're going through, unimaginable. I've got kids. They're grown up now, but every day people are losing their children, their brothers and sisters. I don't know how the world thinks this is okay. We still seem to be on the side of the people who are doing this. We're still supplying arms. And you think, wow, how? The vast majority of people see it for what it is now. Unfortunately, the government's not doing much about it. It comes down to power and money. But what we're allowing to happen is beyond the pale. So if you read the article, the Telegraph journalist is sort of constantly trying to catch him out and make out that Gary Lineker doesn't really know anything about the Middle East and shouldn't really be talking about this. So it's a slightly frustrating article. But Lineker was pushed on his thoughts on October the 7th, which, obviously the article frames as the reason this is all happening. So this is what Gary Lineker says. It has been completely out of proportion to what happened. Obviously, October the 7th was awful, but it's very important to know your history and to study the massacres that happened prior to this, many of them against the Palestinian people. Yes, Israelis have a right to defend themselves, but it appears that Palestinians don't, and that is where it's wrong. Palestinians are caged in this outdoor prison in Gaza, and now it's an outdoor prison that they're bombing. Israel say it's self-defense, but really? Self-defense against what now? Yes, I understand that they need to avenge, but I don't think they've helped their own hostage situation at all. People say it's a complex issue, but I don't think it is. It's inevitable that the Israeli occupation was going to cause massive problems, and I just feel for the Palestinians. The Telegraph sort of then suggested, won't you get a backlash for all of these completely reasonable things that you've said that no one in their right mind could disagree with? And this is what Gary Lineker says. I don't really care about the backlash. I care about doing the right thing, or what I think is the right thing. Some people can disagree, that's fine. But I have to look at myself in the mirror. I think if you're silent on these issues, you're almost complicit. Aaron, I think this is interesting for a number of reasons. I mean, one, I found that at this point, because what Israel are doing is so explicit and so appalling, that it's really actually, if you go into a TV studio, even like GB News, no one's really going to defend what Israel are doing now, right? It's really impossible. And I think we've moved on. I feel like who cares about this cartoon rat, right? I mean, sure, don't. I've seen the emoji probably that is associated with tropes, and Gary Lineker was right to delete it and apologize, sure. But like, come on, let's get some perspective. And I think more and more people feel like that now. The other thing I was thinking, though, is just Gary Lineker is probably one of the most powerful celebrities in the country. You know, we saw this. The BBC tried to take him off air, and literally there were highlights that week, but there was the match of the day had no commentary, had no analysis in between the matches. So you could just see this is a guy who, I mean, they have moved him on now, but the BBC, that he's their most highly paid guy, but he's also underpaid in the sense that if he went and sold his sort of skills to Sky, they'd pay him more. So he's got so much power, and he's willing to say this. How many people do you think have a bit less power than Gary Lineker and feel like they can't say it because they're not Gary Lineker? They're not someone who, if Jake Wallace-Simons or whoever he is, or the board of deputies try and get them cancelled, that could actually mean they can't pay their mortgage. Obviously, I assume Gary Lineker's already paid his mortgage outright. Some comments on this latest intervention from Gary Lineker. In a way, it's nothing new, but I mean, I think it's well put.
No, I think that's precisely right, Michael. I think having to delete that post, and yeah, he should delete it. Of course, he should. And he apologised. I think he should apologise because he has this huge profile. What really angers me, Michael, is when just regular people, like a primary school teacher, will be outed by a national newspaper. You shared something and it has a cartoon rat in the corner. Look, she doesn't need to have a PhD in sociology and have to, vet her social media output. Sorry, I find that ridiculous. But when it's somebody with his profile, okay, I get it. And I think you're right. The focus on this kind of stuff, or from the river to the sea, the focus is done for a reason. It's in inverse correlation actually to how serious it is. It's completely unserious. But you need to talk about it because otherwise you'll be talking about the fact that we've got at least 16,000 dead kids in Palestine. You have the World Health Organization saying that 5-year-old kids have the physical development of 2.5-year-olds. And it's really interesting what you say about people on the right. Very few people now are defending it. Very few people. I mean, even Donald Trump. Donald Trump is saying people are starving. Okay. I did GB News this week, actually, with a Tory pitch. She was defending it. She was sort of saying, her exact words were, nobody's starving in Gaza. And I said, the WHO. Now, you're welcome to say they're not credible. Anybody's welcome to say anything. You're welcome to say the WHO is not a credible organization, but the WHO has said this. She starts talking about UNRWA. I'm not saying UNRWA. I'm saying the WHO. Now, Trump said people are starving. Presumably, that won't be good enough either. But she's very much in the minority. The vast majority of people, including people on the right and the centre right, I know because I talked to some of these people privately, Michael. They said, of course they're being starved. Of course it's ethnic cleansing. Of course this is ethnic cleansing. Of course we're seeing it in real time. But there are no incentives for them to be honest about it, Michael, particularly in the media game. If you're a pundit at the Telegraph, right, or in the Mail, what's the upside for you? There is no advantage there, career-wise, payment-wise. And on top of that, you get the Zionist lobby coming after you. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Miss Rachel, one of the biggest kids' TV entertainers in the world, huge YouTube channel, huge. She's on Netflix too. There was a hit job on her, Michael, in the New York Times. The New York Times, and their only source is an anonymous Zionist account, Stop Anti-Semitism. And they're saying the Stop Anti-Semitism account claims that Miss Rachel, who works with Netflix, apparently is paid by Hamas. And then the NYT go, Ms. Rachel, are you paid by Hamas? And she rejects it. And of course, that goes into the article. She refutes the idea that she's paid by Hamas. This is a lady. And all she's done, Michael, is just to say that kids in Gaza, I see you, you matter, I love you. And she gets called, a terrorist sympathizer. And she's taking money from Hamas. This is the Zionist lobby. They've been doing this as a lobby since before the creation of Israel. But obviously now you've got state apparatus backing you up. So I can totally understand why somebody on the right would do it. At least on the left, you're not going to, broadly speaking, I don't mean The Guardian or whatever, but even The Guardian, you're probably not going to lose your job if you say something like this. But you on the right, you're going to alienate people, you're going to lose friends. Incredible statistic, Michael. Before the last general election, 70% of Conservative MPs were members of Conservative Friends of Israel. 70% of their MPs. Almost 3/4 of their MPs were ensconced within the wider Zionist lobbying infrastructure in this country. So it's really no surprise whatsoever. And I think what people articulate publicly is very different to what they're thinking on the inside. Believe me. I mean, look, I only speak half a dozen people I have in mind on the centre right, the right. but they think very different things to perhaps what you might gather from public declarations. They don't say anything publicly, of course, but their colleagues do, or the guests do, and then you don't really know. It gets drowned out. I'm pretty sure most people with a brain, with a heart, obviously have massive problems with the fact that 5-year-old kids have the physical development of 2.5-year-olds. That 16,000 plus kids have been killed, have been murdered, and many more maimed. Many more, 3-4 times as many maimed physically, not psychologically. Most people have a problem with that. Of course they do. And the problem now for the Zionist lobby and for Israel is that it's literally being beamed directly to you. This is not the Hamas-backed Gaza health ministry. No, I'm literally seeing on my phone children being maimed, losing arms and legs. I can see it. I can see it. I'm not going to be told otherwise by some stupid lobbyist in New York or London. Sorry, those days are over. They're finished. And hence, just to go back to my original point, why there's this emphasis now on, a rat on a TikTok or somebody saying from the river to the sea, which, by the way, say what you want. And even if you do say something bad, it cannot be compared to murdering children, surely. And by the way, if a settler child in the West Bank, an Israeli settler child, is 5 or 6 years old, they're holding a gun, that child is just as innocent as a child who's 5 or 6 in Gaza posing with Hamas. Like, they're children. Surely we can agree on that. And by the way, we can. We can. And I'm not in any way suggesting that settlers are like Hamas. They're not. One is settling, one is a colonial exercise, the other is a people being occupied, Gaza. What I'm saying is that we all agree that children are innocent. A hell of a lot of work has to go into distracting us from that, Michael. A hell of a lot of work. And it's still not enough, right? Because people ultimately see for themselves that kids are suffering.
They have some pretty wild conversations over on GB News, but this incredibly racist defense of the British Empire is definitely up there.
We now have a generation that believes everything we did by colonizing. Yes, true. It is true. They think everything about colonization was wrong. It wasn't. There were some terrible things and there were some good things to come out of it. And that is about properly acknowledging your past.
Education.
Yes, completely.
Sanitation.
Transportation.
Yeah. There was so much that we brought to communities.
But you see, you're typical of what we're talking about.
No, I'm saying that colonisation, the empire was wrong. It was wrong, full stop. That's, the things that Britain might have done.
But that's very much through your modern sensibilities, you might say that, because we wouldn't now routinely go into other countries.
It was a profoundly racist set of basically invasions of other people, where we subjugated people to our rule and sort of made them work for us. It was completely
made their countries work.
Could imagine yourself in the shoes of a 13-year-old boy hearing you say that.
Now, so much to comment on. I've got one more part of that conversation. So there's only one bit I want to sort of bring out here, which is the idea of doing history by how you can make a 13-year-old boy feel good about their country. Can you imagine sort of like you've had this bit, there's a big debate about the Holocaust, right? And someone says, well, it was really bad. They killed 6 million Jews. They were going to kill it. It was like, they're like, well, how's that going to make a 13-year-old German boy feel? Surely you've got to say there were good things about the Holocaust as well as bad things. But otherwise you might make sort of all of these kids not have a strong sense of themselves. That's not an argument, right? It's not remotely a valid argument. As I say, lots more to comment on there, but I want to go to the rest of the clip first.
How do they then carry that through life?
Well,
in terms of who I am as a Brit.
But it's not about...
We had racist ancestors. Say it,
but Bev...
But I'm saying that we hear much more of that than we do about the benefits of that period of time.
Well, because I don't think there were benefits. I think that we have to be completely...
Of course there were.
So I don't think there were.
There were benefits to us.
A lot of those countries did not... Jonathan, those countries...
It absolutely does.
Those countries did not have money. They did not have the creativity. They did not have people in positions of power to do this. No, they didn't.
Those countries did not have money or creativity. We should have got William Dalrymple on for this, shouldn't we? Aaron, I know you've done some good videos about sort of the British in India. Let's focus on India for now. Did they not have money or creativity in India before the Brits arrived?
Well, Mughal India, Michael, when the Brits arrived, was approximately 20 to 25% of global GDP. When Britain leaves India just after the Second World War, its economy, as in modern day India, not the whole of the Indian Raj, which included Pakistan, Burma, etc. Just India was about 2% of global GDP. So you've gone from 25% of global GDP to 2% of global GDP in about 200 years. So the idea that the British Empire made India rich, self-evidently nonsensical. Yes, railways were built. That was to move resources around the country for Britain to make money and get rich. And actually, shipbuilding in India at the start of the 18th century was among the best in the world. So, yeah, it's nonsensical culture as well. Obviously, we don't need to go there. But just complete idiocy. You know, I'm very happy to be exposed to opinions I disagree with if the person's actually thought about them and read them. And they do exist, right? Doesn't include these people. Just utter idiocy masquerading as intelligence. I mean, India and China for 18 of the last 20 centuries have been the two world's biggest economies. Not surprisingly, they have massive populations. But like I say, when we left India just after the Second World War, they were 2% of global GDP. That's before we talk about things like the Bengal famine, etc. There's not been a single famine in India since the end of empire. There were multiple famines in India during the 19th century because we were trying to integrate them into a broader global economy, right? Very well examined in a fantastic book called Late Victorian Holocaust by Mike Davis. Really recommend it. But yeah, that's what we should be talking about. Doesn't mean people should feel guilty about that today. And Britain did do some really good things in history. Kids shouldn't feel guilty about being British. But I find it bizarre, Michael, actually, that a country which gave the world Isaac Newton, discerns the laws of gravity, Charles Darwin works out evolutionary adaptation, Jenner comes up with vaccines, Maxwell, Faraday, Charles Bessemer innovates modern steel manufacture. I mean, the list goes on. My goodness, Michael. Watt and Bolton, the steam engine, basically kickstart the Industrial Revolution. Talk about these people. Why are you so obsessed about talking about people killing each other? I don't get it. I don't want anybody to feel ashamed about stuff that happened 250 years ago. Why should you? You're not responsible for it. But if you want people, young people in particular, to feel happy and proud about their country, totally get it. Tell them about the good stuff. It's a great place to start. Here's the sad thing, Michael. Most of the people saying that we gave India all those things, they don't even know the people I'm talking about. They don't know who Faraday is. They don't know who Maxwell is. They don't know who, maybe Brunel, the godfather of modern industrial engineering, maybe Brunel. They don't know who Jenner is. Comes up with the first, effectively, inoculation with cowpox. They don't know who these people are. And they don't know who these people are because as a country, we've not taken industry and making things seriously for 40, 50 years. These things were really core to British identity for a very long time. They haven't been because we don't make anything. Look outside. It's estate agents and nail bars. We need to go back to that. So yes, young people should feel very proud of where they come from for the right reasons, not for killing people. Really stupid. And finally, Michael, there were critics of British Empire in the 19th century. People like Richard Cobden, John Bright. They were Liberal MPs. They weren't even left-wing. They said, look, we believe in free trade. We think we make more money via free trade rather than colonizing countries. That loses us money. That was a debate within British civil society. Oh, well, they didn't know it's all culturally relative. No, there were people literally in the Economist magazine and the Times of London, Liberal MPs, saying, actually, this is not in our self-interest. We should stop doing it. But again, we're not having that level of debate in this country because of the media. The media doesn't want an informed debate. It doesn't want an informed citizenry. It wants polarization and stupidity.
No, that was really well put. I really like the way you talk about that as well, because I don't want to get stuck in the culture war of like the left think Britain sucks and the right think Britain's great. It's like there's some great things about this country, but choose the actual good ones. Don't relitigate the sort of violent oppression and invasion of other people, which was very clearly driven by a racist ideology. Like why? I mean, you've put it better than I could. Just if you want a nice vision of Britain to cling on to, pick out the good things. Also look at the bad things. You shouldn't just pick out the good things, but don't try and pretend the bad things are the good things. Let's wrap up there. We've gone slightly over. So much covered tonight. Aaron Bastani, it's been a pleasure.
Michael, you let me talk a lot, but I learned a lot listening to your mea culpa, Michael. It takes a big person to apologize. You did it so quickly as well. I think that's a good thing. So well done, you.
Thank you very much. I won't pat myself on the back too much for not really getting the significance of a speech on Monday. Probably should have got it first time round, but there we are. Lessons learned. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back on Monday for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.